Hello everyone, my name is Protesilaos, also known as Prot. In this video, I will demonstrate the default interface for minibuffer completions in Emacs. This is an interface that has enjoyed a lot of small yet important improvements over the years, and for Emacs 31, which is the next stable release that should be out in a matter of days, in Emacs 31 there will be some more improvements which I think together with the previous improvements make for a very nice out of the box experience. Rather, not out of the box, a default interface which with some configuration becomes a very nice experience. What I want to do in this video is show you how it works by default and how it works after we make those necessary tweaks, and then also elaborate a bit on some of the items that are of interest to power users. What I have here in front of me in this Emacs buffer is an article that I have written about this topic. It describes what I'm about to present, and it also includes sample code snippets. I will write this article on my website in the publication that will embed this video on my website. So if you are watching this on the video hosting platform, I will include a link in the description so you can find all of this. It would be a link specifically to the article, and you can find all of this here. So let me get started with the default minibuffer completion experience. When we are talking about completion in Emacs, we are referring to interactions where you can select one among many candidates, one among many options, you might say. And you can select by visually moving to where you want and picking the candidate, or by typing. And so when you type, the list of candidates of available options will shrink to match what you have typed. So you can narrow and then pick what you want. By default, when we use Emacs, some of the commands that perform completion are the commands that switch between buffers, find, open a file, visit a bookmark, these sorts of commands. There are many commands that perform completion in Emacs, but these are some of the most common ones. So let me start with one of those commands. I will do mx switch to buffer. So I am invoking that. And now I have configured my Emacs to use settings that are basically the defaults. And what happens by default when we are using the interface here for performing completion is that the mini buffer is focused, the cursor is there, and we don't see any other indication that completion is involved. So this is a mini buffer that can do completion, but we don't know about it. We do know, of course, through experience, but otherwise there is no visual hint to that effect. What we can do when we are in a mini buffer like this and we are not sure is we can hit the tab key. We can press tab. So I am doing that right now. And if we can perform completion, what will happen is that Emacs will bring up the completions buffer, which we see over here in this window over here. And in the completions buffer, there will be a listing of the completion candidates. So these are our options. And by default, above that, there will be a header that describes the key bindings we can type, we can press, so that we can navigate this buffer here while being in the mini buffer. This is the idea. Now, as I said, you can go and select. So, for example, if I want to switch to the scratch buffer, I can click here with the mouse, or I can type one of those keys that I am told about there. I find what I want, I hit enter, I go there. Okay. What I can also do though is I can switch to buffer again and I will type. So I will type and do tab, and then again, I have matched what I'm looking for and I switch to it that way. Now let's do this slowly. I have hit tab, so now the completions show up. I see 4 options here. I can pick one among 4. Now I haven't typed anything, so I see all the available options. If I type something now, I am about to narrow the results to those which include what I have typed, specifically what I have typed as a prefix. Now, what you see among the four completions is there are two completions, two candidates rather, that match asterisk and then something. It's the messages and the scratch buffer. However, even though I have typed, the completions buffer hasn't been updated. It remains static. It remains the way it was when I originally brought it up. For it to update, I have to hit tab again. In other words, I have to manually instruct Emacs to recompute the completion candidate. And in doing so, it is now saying, okay, given the asterisk, you have messages and you have scratch. These are the two completion candidates that are available for what you have typed. And then, of course, if I continue typing, as you see here, it still doesn't update. I have to explicitly tell it, okay, recompute. In other words, tab, and it will do that. If you are matching now something uniquely, which is what I am doing here, the scratch buffer over here, if you do tab, I am doing tab now, it doesn't do anything because there are no more completions. So Emacs will not produce an empty completions buffer just to take up space. It will just show you this, so you know that you can complete against this. And of course, you do it that way. Now, let me show you something which is important. So here you will see that these four completion candidates are on a 2x2 grid, okay? And this is the default layout that Emacs will use. It's a horizontally oriented grid. And it is telling you that you can do meta down and meta up to navigate the completions. So right now I will do meta down. So I do it the first time, I pick the top left candidate. I will do now meta down again, and to me, down intuitively means literally down. But if I do meta down here, it goes to the next candidate. So it's not really down, it's next. And next, in this case, because it's a horizontally oriented grid, means go from number 1 on row 1 to number 2 on row 1. And then if I do meta down again, it means, okay, we don't have anything on row 1, go to row 2. So now we are row 2, column 1, right? And basically this is the idea. And of course, meta up to go in the other direction. Now, to me, this is already a little bit confusing. But here, it's only four options. I am paying attention. I am doing it slowly. So, of course, I can reason about it. But when I have lots of options and in a grid that includes more columns, more rows, things get a little bit confusing. So let me show you how that looks. I have to make the text smaller though, and maybe I have to make the frame a little bit wider. So you don't need to be able to read this for now. Just focus on this. So I have done now, I have typed something and I have hit tab. And now Emacs produced this completions buffer. And you will notice that there are three columns here. Granted, my video is covering some of it. But you can see like there is one column here, another here, and the third one over here. In total, it is displaying 142 candidates. So it created a grid and it also expanded the completions buffer as much as possible so that it can fit everything in a single screen full. And this is an important detail that we will cover in a little bit. So let me now make this again larger and let me see where we are here. So maybe like this. Okay. So you see, right? So when you have like a grid with lots of options like that, meta up, meta down can be a little bit confusing. So me personally, I don't like the grid. I like a single column, which is now easy to reason about. Furthermore, I do not like the completions to pop up beyond a certain point. Like up until this point looks okay. But if it comes all the way up here, it is distracting, for me at least. Especially if I have like a more elaborate window layout where I am probably doing some important work and I need to be seeing stuff. So when I am using the completions, I don't want everything to disappear just for me to focus on the completions because I get disoriented. So let's now move then, given this, let's now move to the settings that I have here that of course I don't need to cover each of those. I don't need to tell you about each of those. I have written about it. I will include the link, as I told you. Here there are comments so you can understand what each of these does. And of course, what I am showing here doesn't mean that this is the only way. Of course, you can read the documentation and configure things to your liking, but this is how I like it. So let me evaluate this now, and let's do this again. I will do now Control X B. Okay. Notice now what happened. I did the same thing I was doing earlier to select the buffer. But now, instead of just seeing a generic buffer there without any hint that there are completions, what I am now seeing is the mini buffer, which is active, and right above it, the completions have popped up automatically. I didn't hit tab, they just popped up. Furthermore, if I now use navigation, I can just use the arrow keys. I don't need to use meta up, meta down. The arrow keys will suffice. So I just type the arrow keys here and it's up and down. There is no right, there is no left. It's not a grid. It's a single column like that, which is how I prefer it. Now, here there is also another setting which will do the following. When I type, it will automatically update the completion. So I will just hit the letter P, for example, and you see it will do exactly what you see over there, where I now have P. What is the only thing that completes P? It's this one over here, right? So if I delete it now like this, I see again all the candidates that match what I have in the mini buffer. In this case, nothing. So all the candidates are on display, right? So this is a setting which makes things, I think, more convenient. And the reason it is more convenient is because now if I am searching for things, for example, I will do something to describe a function. I have, because I have a single column like this, everything is there, and I get useful annotations on the side, which for me are important. Like I can read and I can understand what is happening here. This is the idea. And with the single column, I can navigate through them up and down, and that's the point over there. Now, let me just disable this. Let me just close this. I want to again do what I did earlier with the 142 candidates that I had. So let me make my text small. Let me make the frame large, and I will just type here. And already, even though you cannot read, you can tell already that the mini buffer did not balloon in size. It stayed there. You can see where the line is. You don't have to be able to read at this point. I will enlarge the font. What matters is that it took up the height that I instructed it to take. So it didn't go beyond that. Let me just make it larger again. So let's put this over here. It didn't make it larger. So specifically, it's this one. I don't want it to be taller than this height here. Okay, that is the idea. So I think that is a nice thing to have. And there are some other nice things, such as, for example, this, which I cannot demonstrate now, but you will see it in practice. Like as you do completion, your most recent options will be surfaced towards the top. And as I explained here, this is playing really nicely with the built-in save hist mode, because now you can persist mini buffer histories between Emacs sessions, and so what you are typing more frequently will be available right there at the top. So basically, this would be it to improve the out-of-the-box experience with the default completion. And you may want this just to show you. It's not a lot of settings. Like how many are there? Like you can see here, it's basically this, and it closes there, right? And with the comments, right? So it's really small. The point is that with these few settings, you take the default Emacs experience for mini buffer completion and you arguably improve on it. Okay. Now, this is not all you can do with this. Like if you are a power user, you may want to be more opinionated with how things work. And this is the next thing I want to show you. But on this point, this is already good. You can use it. If you are using Emacs in an environment where you cannot install packages, this is a very good way to set things up. If you prefer to rely on the built-in functionality and only install external packages when necessary, this is again a good way to go about it. So you have more options. That is the idea, and I think this is quite good. It still is a bit rough around the edges, like it's not as polished as a package like Vertigo, for example, but I would say it's pretty good nowadays. So let me show you now what is for power users. It is all encapsulated in this variable over here, the completion category overrides. Now, the completion category overrides is how you can configure on a per completion category basis what should happen for the behavior of the minibuffer. Like what you saw earlier with the eager display, for example, where the minibuffer pops up automatically the completions. Like that, you can control it on a per category basis. So you may say something like, you know what, for files, I do not want it to pop up. I want it to pop up for buffers, though, like this sort of thing, right? Now, here I have an example. And this example pertains to the most common use case, which is for the completion styles. Now, the completion styles themselves, this one that I'm highlighting here, are the pattern matching algorithms that are used by Emacs to determine the completion candidates. Like, given what you have typed, what are the matches for that? And what you are seeing here are some of the built-in completion styles. There is another one, an external one, which is very popular and which I also used, called orderless. And orderless is one of those completion styles, right? But I won't go into orderless now. The point is that we tell Emacs how we like to interpret our input. Now, what you are seeing here, the next thing over here is that, okay, globally, generally, these are the completion styles. This is my preference. But specifically for the file category, so for any mini buffer prompt that has the file category, specifically for that, I want the completion styles to be this. It's the partial completion style. I won't explain what the partial completion style is. What you can do is you can do Emacs describe variable and go to the completion styles. And in the completion styles, you will see this being mentioned, the completion styles A list. And if you follow that link, it will tell you exactly what all of the completion styles are. For example, partial completion. It's a completion of multiple words, blah, blah, blah. Okay, you can read this at your own pace. No need for me to do that right here. It's beside the point. What matters is that you can be really picky and be like, okay, for this category, I want that. For that category, I want this. So let's move to the next thing. I do not know how you can use built-in functionality to get the category. So maybe that is an option, but I haven't found it. And I have had this for such a long time. So now this is what I have been using for many years already in one form or another. But the point is that you can use this, and I explain how to use it. I will not cover this right now. But what matters is that you are in a mini buffer prompt. For example, I am in this switch to buffer prompt, and you want to evaluate the expression, which is the prot common completion category in this case. You want to evaluate this. So I will hit enter, and it will tell you buffer. So you know that this interface here, this completion prompt, the switch to buffer prompt, has the completion category buffer. Okay? So that's all you need to know. There are lots of completion categories, and if there is no completion category, you will see nil. Now, with that information, you can now go and define your own overrides for each completion category that you care about. And here I show an anatomy of the completion category, like an anatomy of the override as a whole. and I explain what each of those things are. So category would be the symbol that you get from calling that function. Styles would be one or more completion styles. For example, here it would be basic and then flex and then orderless, like that sort of thing. Okay. So like that. And then here I explain what those are. Now I have an example here. So let's actually do this example. So let me focus this and evaluate it. So now I have the file use eager display nil, which means that the completions should not pop up automatically, but eager update true. So if the completions are on display, I want them to be computed automatically as I type. For buffer here, for demo purposes, I'd say, okay, yes to all. I want them to show up automatically and I want them to also update automatically. Okay, this is the idea. So let's do this. I will do switch to buffer, automatically pops up. I will type the letter P, automatically narrows accordingly. So let me stop that. I will do now find file, nothing pops up. I have to do tab for things to pop up. And once I do tab, of course, I will see that. And if I were to type, for example, now, if I do .dir, oh no, this didn't happen correctly. What happened? Did I? Sorry. Yeah, no, it happened correctly. I misunderstood. So I have it to automatically update. So yes. So if I do that, of course, I don't see anything. If I type, it automatically updates because that's exactly what I have configured it to do over here. If I don't want it to auto update, actually, let's do this as well. So I will have it. I will produce the completions. I will type .dir. Nothing happens. I have to hit tab again. Okay. So that is the idea. So let's move now to the final part of what a power user could do with this sort of thing. So I have over here overrides for the other functions that are covered for all the completion categories. So for example, here I have a function that will group files according to some rules I have defined here. You can read the comments. I don't need to explain all of this. What matters is that when you are performing completion, there will be this metadata around the completion. So the category is, of course, one piece of metadata, but there are more, such as how should these completions be grouped? How should these completions be annotated? How should these completions be sorted? Okay, so all of that is controlled by functions. And what I have over here is I have an example for files. So let's do this again. I will open the files here, okay? And you will see that all that I get is all the files like that. It's 300 plus files like this, okay? So now I will stop doing that and I will evaluate this buffer here. Let's evaluate. And now I will do this again. Let's show the files. And now you will see that it's no longer a flat listing. There is a directories heading here. That's a group of the directories that are in this specific folder. And then there is a grouping of hidden files, and then there is a .org, and so on. I don't need to go through all the groups. The point is that I was able to get this by having this specific function over here. Similarly, I have another function which is for sorting the files. And I want to say in this case that, okay, among all the files, specifically this, I don't want to see. So as you can imagine, you can have whatever you need here to say something like, well, if I am doing a video, for example, I want to have a function there which will hide all the files that I consider private. And what I consider private is arbitrary, right? So it could be a function that checks for a certain prefix, or it checks if we are in a certain directory, or like you can imagine, like it's arbitrary code, you write whatever you want. But basically, I can manipulate the completion candidates to show what I need to see. And what I also say here is that I want to sort those in a specific way, organize them in a specific way. What exactly doesn't really matter. It's not the point. What matters is that once I have those functions, you can see the category overrides here. I can provide them here. I can define them here. So now I say, for the file completion category, these are all the overrides. And here is the group function. Here is the display sort function. And if you want to go a step further, you can read about the completion metadata and also do the annotation function, the affixation function, and I believe that's it. So I believe there are 4 functions. So, and you can do it for those as well. I don't need to show you here, but you get the idea. Like, you can really have full control of how things work. And then, as I said, you can do it on a per category basis. Let me show you, lastly, let me show you how I do it in my Emacs. So let's do the completion category, oh, sorry, not prod, completion. Sorry, let's do it. Completion, category overrides. No, category. Yeah, of course, now I don't have the exact settings that I have. Maybe it's like this. Okay, yeah. It's not with the slashes. Sorry, with the dashes. So here are my exact settings. Of course, let me make this a bit larger. Actually, I can have it like this. So maybe you can still see everything. So I don't want you to focus on what I am doing here, but what matters is that you can really go far, right? So you can really have all sorts of elaborate configurations, and you can be like, okay, for this I want that, for that I want this, and so on. I don't need to belabor this point. What matters is that you can be really prescriptive with what Emacs should be doing. And in conclusion, like, why would you want to do all of this? And for me, at least in my workflow, the answer is that there are cases where you don't want the mini buffer to pop up automatically, for example, like this one. I don't want it to pop up because, one, I usually know what I'm doing, where I am going. Two, I may have files that I don't want to show in a video. And three, I don't want a pop-up like this because it has the effect of shifting all the other windows. And I don't want that to happen because if I am doing some work, it can feel disorienting. Like, I don't want things to be jumping around. So me, when I configure the mini buffer, I configure it so that by default, it is minimal like that. And actually, I will do this. So prot mini buffer completions mode. Let me actually enable it so I have my settings. So I do this for basically everything by default. So Emacs will not show anything by default. If I type something like prot completion tab, now it shows it. And then, of course, now it will behave the way I have explained here. Okay. This specific approach of what I just described, of being minimal by default but still capable, still available, is how I also configure Vertigo. Actually, normally I use Vertigo, but I configure it so that it is minimalist by default. I won't go into how I do that. You can find it in my .emacs, but it is how I really like things. So let me say in conclusion a few words about this in relation to external packages, which I mentioned here, which are these external packages which are relevant for this case. What I just demonstrated is really competing with Vertigo. So it's really the interface. Vertigo is responsible for producing a vertical mini buffer. Of course, now I am kind of simplifying what it does because Vertigo is also really polished, it's really responsive, it's robust, it's very good, right? But fundamentally, it's a way to display the candidates in a vertical layout by default. Okay, so the default completions and Vertigo are covering basically the same space. But beyond that, all these other packages over here, you can still benefit from, you can still use. So they are not replaced by the default completions UI, the default completions user interface. Okay. Of course, as I explained here, you can still work around the absence of those packages. So if you really don't want to use them, or if you are in an environment where you cannot install packages, there are ways around them. Like, you can get most of the functionality they provide, or at least have functionality that is good enough to get the job done. But still, some of that functionality simply doesn't exist in Emacs, so you really benefit from having those packages available and ready to go. And of course, if you have the packages, maybe there is a question mark of whether you need the default completion UI. Why not have Vertigo as well? But that's up to you. I think it's a matter of style, whether you like this or not. I think it's good that we have options. I think it's great that the default completion interface is seeing improvements. It is being refined continuously. And I think now it is a viable option. It is quite good. It's not perfect, but it is very good. That's all for today, folks. As I said, I will include a link to my article, specifically to the article that will have this configuration over here, what I just demonstrated. So you will find it on my website. Thank you very much for your attention. Now take care and goodbye.